it's unbelievably weak. I would say, I would call it the weakest right now. After reading that piece of garbage they sent us, I didn't even finish reading it. They said, I'm not going to waste my time reading it. I would say it's one of the weakest right now. It's on life support.
That's the president in the Oval Office yesterday. He said that the ceasefire with Iran is hanging on by a thread after what he called a totally unacceptable response to the U.S.'s peace plan. Now, Iran reportedly wanted the U.S. to pay war damages, recognize Iran's sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz, end sanctions, and release blocked assets, money. The commander-in-chief telling Fox he's now considering restarting the Project Freedom. That was the U.S.'s previous effort to escort ships through the Persian Gulf and the Strait. So far, Central Command has redirected 62 ships during the blockade on Iranian ports. Meanwhile, the president is weighing suspending the federal gas tax to ease prices, to do anything he can to get prices lower. Today's price, the average at the pump, $4.50 a gallon for regular gasoline, although that's lower than record highs seen during the Biden administration. Joining me now is the former Speaker of the House and Fox News contributor, Newt Gingrich. Mr. Speaker, always a pleasure.
It's great to be with you.
Thanks so much for being here. So how do you look at all of this? You've got the Iranian regime continuing to push back, will not go away. It's a threat to the world, and yet you've got President Trump watching Iran, the U.S. economy, trying to get prices down, and, of course, the midterm elections.
Well, I mean, that's why he's president. It's a big job, and he's tackled a very important, necessary thing. The challenge now for him is to get the system, particularly the Pentagon, to develop a plan that will bring the Iranians around. The Iranians fought Iraq for 8 years, suffered 1 million casualties, 300,000 dead. Earlier this year, they killed 42,000 of their own people. This is a very tough dictatorship. And I think the president ultimately is going to have to defeat it. Now, I think what he's done, he's tried to negotiate. I mean, everybody has to recognize he has given them every opportunity to avoid being destroyed. And they basically have said, there's nothing you can do to us, because it's a religiously based dictatorship, that's going to make us give up who we are. And so he's got to make a decision. And I think the key, is the Strait of Hormuz, because if we reopen the strait and the ships come out, the price of oil will collapse almost overnight.
Yeah.
And the president then can go into the election pretty confident that the Republicans are going to have a historically amazing sweep. When people ask me what I think is going to happen, I just say to them, tell me the price of gasoline on Labor Day.
Yeah.
And if he's bringing it down and people feel good about that, they will tolerate us doing what we have to, as long as it doesn't involve ground troops. They'll tolerate doing almost anything to Iran for as long as it takes.
Yeah.
But if they're paying $4.50 or $5 a gallon, they're going to be pretty unhappy, and the Republicans will be defeated.
Well, I mean, this China trip is real interesting in terms of China's role in the Iran conflict. I mean, the president is headed to Beijing. He'll be there Wednesday night. It's a 2-day summit. It begins Thursday and Friday. He'll meet with Xi Jinping. This conflict expected to dominate the conversation. Yeah, how can it? The president said the ceasefire is on life support, and the U.S. and Beijing are also expected to extend that trade truce that they reached it in South Korea back in October. Here's what the president said on his expectations for the trip. Watch this.
What do you hope to get out of the summit in China, and how much has the war in Iran changed the agenda?
Look, I have a great relationship with President Xi. We're doing a lot of business, but it's smart business. We used to be taken advantage of for years with our previous presidents, and now we're doing great with China. We make a lot of money with China. And I think you can see that with the fact that in Hormuz, they get a big percentage, 40% of their oil from Hormuz. There's been no ships coming in, no nasty ships coming in that we end up in skirmishes with. He'd like to see it get done. I respect him a lot, and hopefully he respects me.
Newt, I heard you say that this summit could be, quote, remarkable breakthrough for the United States. I mean, if President Trump comes home from China and says China is now going to buy oil and gas from the Gulf of America, I think that would be huge.
Well, that'd be enormous. I also think they're going to talk seriously about artificial intelligence, because we are on the edge of breakthroughs that are a little scary. And the only way to deal with them is to have both the United States and China decide on some kind of rules of the road to not have certain kinds of capabilities ever become available.
Yeah.
Because some of it is really like science fiction.
Absolutely.
Except it's now.
We did a whole week last week, our AI week, and what we did was probe some of these questions around the Anthropic breach,
That's right.
the Anthropic study, and what is there a role for government? But you're right. I mean, China and the U.S. have to be on the same page
That's
about
right.
this, because we can't hold back if China's not. But the agentic AI is scary. You're wondering if you're going into like this Terminator phase. But let me get your take on what's going on with the redistricting and how that applies to the midterms, because the Supreme Court clearing the way for Alabama to pursue a new congressional map ahead of the midterm elections. The state's current map currently favors Republicans 5-2. It includes 2 majority black districts. Democrats are asking the Virginia Supreme Court to halt its ruling on the newly passed congressional map, which struck down the 10-1 Democrat-friendly map as unconstitutional. And now it's been a real positive for Republicans. How do you see redistricting impacting the midterms?
You know, I thought about this over the last couple of weeks. We have not seen this kind of a nationwide struggle for power at every level. I mean, the courts, the redistricting, taking on the universities, since Jefferson in 1796 decided to destroy the Federalists. And ironically, the last stand of that fight is in Massachusetts in 1812. Eldridge Gerry is writing the map for Congress, and one of the members says that district looks like a salamander, and somebody else says, no, that's a gerrymander. And that the whole concept comes from the last effort of the Federalists to survive, and they fail and disappear. And we have what's called the era of good feeling, because there's nobody left to fight. I mean, the Democrat Party, which is the longest standing political party in the world, had totally wiped out their opponents. This fight is war to the knife. Both sides understand that it's existential, and you know, you had redistricting in California, and all the Democrats applauded. They may have redistricting in New York. So if the Democrats are changing Republican districts, the Democrats are really happy. If the Republicans are changing Democratic districts, the Democrats are really unhappy.
Right.
And I think you're going to, I personally believe, if gasoline prices are reasonable by Labor Day, you're going to see a historic Republican sweep in the off year on a scale that we've really not seen in modern times.
Wow. So you're not you're betting that the Republicans can sweep it. That you're thinking.
Oh yeah, I think that the Democrats, frankly, are now nuts. I mean, if you watch them, you know, you have a candidate for governor in California who says that part of his written platform is that he will bring back all of the people deported by ICE. Now,
wow.
You say the average American, would you like, you know, the Venezuelan murderers, the El Salvador rapists, et cetera, brought back? They're going to think this is what Trump said in the State of the Union. They're crazy. And I think a crazy party can survive if the Republicans fail economically on gasoline. But if the Republicans are seen as okay, I think the Democrats are going to suffer horrendous losses.
Well, you know, I think they don't have to lose seats, the House, because actually, when you look at President Trump's agenda, it's working. And it's very positive for the backdrop, putting the war aside. Now, you've got a 4-pillar strategy for Republicans to maintain control of Congress for the rest of the president's second term. I want to get your take on what the Republicans need to do to communicate this message, because I agree, there is room here to actually gain seats for the Republicans in November.
Look, I think it's really very straightforward. First, the Republicans have to tell what they have done and, more importantly, what they want to do. People vote about the future. So that's number one. Second, they have to communicate that the Democrats are really at war with the American people. You take this case of the male athlete who won in the female category in California. That's about 15% of the country. That's where the Democrats are. And we have a project called the America's New Majority Project, and you can go see it on the website. There is issue after issue after issue. Having the right to check and make sure you're an American citizen before you vote. That's about an 85% issue.
Exactly.
So the second pillar is Democrats literally are at war with the American people. The third pillar is what I said a minute ago, which is Their left is not socialist, it's crazy. And it's much what happened to George McGovern in '72 when he only carried one state, is that people rendered a judgment. You put together the dumbest things Democrats are saying today,
Yeah.
and they're basically nuts. And then the fourth one, frankly, is the do devastatingly bad things Democrats if they took control of the Congress. The number of Democrats who said, I'm going to introduce impeachment on the first day. Now, if you say to the American people, do you really want to have nothing happen for
Right.
2 solid years? And I think Schumer and Jeffries, in that sense, are the poster children for where we want to go.
I think this is such a good point. And the president said that to me in my interview a couple of weeks ago. He said, don't forget, if they win in the midterms, they're going to get rid of no tax on tips. They're going to get rid of the tax cuts. They're going to try all they can to reverse the president's agenda. Real quick, we got to jump. If they win seats and the Democrats take the majority, does the president's agenda stop?
It'll be a real tough fight.
Okay. Newt, great to have you this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Newt Gingrich here in studio. We'll be right back.